Welcome to Care for Creation. I'm Elizabeth Lang. I'm the designated leader, which means I have some ideas of what we can do. And there are times when I will get out of the way and let people add their wisdom. So here we are in Care for Creation, and we're going to read from Genesis, or someone's going to read from Genesis on the 5th day of creation, where we get creatures swarming that are those that fly in the air and those that swim in the waters. So first of all, welcome back, people who are back, and welcome to people who are new. I need a reader. Is there someone who is willing to read from the first chapter of Genesis, verses 20 through 23?
I can.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the water in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, a 5th day.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful to hear it again. So do we have another reader who would read Genesis 1, 20 through 23? And listen. I mean, of course you listened the first time, but listen again to what strikes you about this 5th day of creation as you hear the story. So who would read it again?
I'll read it.
Okay.
And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day.
Okay, so folks, what did you hear?
Well, I heard that he created it, and then he kind of pushed them out of the nest and said, "Now you've got to, you've got to create. You've got to multiply. It's up to you.
There may be swarms, but let's have more swarms."
That's right.
And it's up to, I've started it.
Mm-hmm.
But birds, fish, whales, hey, carry it on.
Mm-hmm.
What else did you hear?
The word that struck me was monsters.
Yes. And I'm going to get back to that with a reference to Psalm 104. It's like there's some scary things out there, or big things anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not just, minnows and fish. I think with the monsters, they may have been thinking like whales. Or maybe scary things, sharks.
Like dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs, all right.
True.
Yeah.
Which apparently at some point were not fruitful and multiplying anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious if there was a different meaning there, because I mean, they talk about creatures large and small, but then monstrous is a totally different connotation. That
it seems more than just big.
More than just large. Yeah, it's scary.
Mark, I'm with you. It strikes me that there was something on plate than just creating something big, that there was other objectives in creating monsters.
Well, the Babylonian creation myth does have a sense that of a monster that had to be slain in the process of creation, but that it's a very different myth in the sense of the process of creation as a battle, as opposed to the orderly description that we get in the first chapter of Genesis. But there's a sense in it of a monster of chaos, and that the water can be dangerous. I mean, biblically, you've got great thanksgiving for water, but you also have other references where the water is not trustworthy and it's dangerous, it's foreign. So we get both when you look at biblical stories, both a thanksgiving for water and also a fear that in water there lurks danger. It's associated with chaos. So we get both. But I'm going to intentionally go back to monsters later. But okay, Mark.
Well, no, I was just gonna say it occurs to me that the like Greek mythological creatures and everything. I mean, is this the origin of it, of that, the creation story? Is that what prompted maybe some of this monstrous reference? I don't know, just sounds logical, but I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, there are other creation myths from the Middle East where the process of creation involves killing, danger, and the need to slay the evil one associated with water. We've got some new people. Anyone else who knows more about the various creation myths and the origin of the I don't want to go into it too much, but who could add to this sense of the dangerous monsters that are. It doesn't say dangerous, but it does say monsters. So that connotation is big, and maybe something else going with it. Anyone want to add? We got some new people who could bring us some wisdom, I bet. Okay, moving on. What else? But then again, what does God call what's there on that fifth day? Those swarms that inhabit the seas and swim across fly across the sky. He calls it good. So you have in Christianity a strain that says the material and the earthly and the creatures and creation isn't as good as the spiritual. The world doesn't count as much. There's a whole strain of that in Christianity. If you want to resist that, you can go back to the first chapter of Genesis where it's called good. I have an agenda. I'd like to resist the fact that the earth doesn't count, only the spiritual. But I won't go into that. I might start ranting. So anything else that we haven't mentioned from those few verses of Genesis that struck you this time?
Well, I think it's interesting that where it says God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, but then the focus is really the rest of it on things in the water and birds, without any other discussion of every living creature.
Right. We get the mammals and the animals the next day.
Yeah, but it says in every living creature that moves, so I don't know.
Well, what does it say? Look at it again, Terry. That moves where?
Well, it says of every kind. So to me, that would say more than just the birds and the creatures in the sea.
Well, and it goes on to describe in this particular fifth day, though, it emphasizes those creatures that
with which the water swarm.
So we'll get the other animals tomorrow. Well, next week, but we get them on the next day of creation. I would like to, setting this in the context of worship, offer a prayer that some of you've heard before. It's the prayer of one of the early church fathers. So the Lord be with you.
And
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, enlarge within us the sense of fellowship with all living things, even our brothers, the animals, to whom you gave the earth as their home in common with us. We remember with shame that in the past we have exercised our dominion with ruthless cruelty, so that the voice of the earth, which should have gone up to you in song, has been a groan of pain. May we realize that they live not for us alone, but for themselves and for you, and that they love the sweetness of life. Amen.
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 Okay, last week we looked at vegetation particularly and the earth, and emphasized our need to care for the land and for vegetation. And I'm just wondering, and we also celebrated a little bit our memories of moving on the land and noticing plants. And I'm just wondering, did any of you during the last week or so, whether you were in class last Sunday or not, notice anything about the land, the earth, or plants? Anybody take a walk and see some stuff? Or go out and examine what was coming up in their backyard? What'd you notice?
Well, we have some irises that are unusual, and so I did take some notice of those. They're white, unlike most blue irises and purple. These are white, and we had harvested them out of the wild, and they are prospering.
Okay, anyone else?
John, I wanted to talk about Iris too. I lost an aunt a year ago named Iris. So shortly thereafter, we found some iris and planted them, but I think we planted them in the wrong place. So we were kind of despairing we're gonna have to move them, but they bloomed last week, and it's very close to the first anniversary of her death.
Ah,
So that was
nice
exciting.
timing.
Yeah, we were just noticing things, talking about the yard or our neighborhood, but so many things were killed during the ice storm, during the cold, but those that survived just seem to be thriving. I mean, things that have come back are really coming back, and lots of growth, lots of beauty. So it seems to be this stark difference. Either it made it and it's thriving, or it just didn't make it at all. So I don't know, just that stark difference seemed to really resonate.
I have morning glories coming up, and I didn't know they were going to be perennials. And that was a very great surprise. They're just every place.
What a delightful surprise.
It was. It was.
Anyone else? Okay, at the end of last week also, in response to problems of deforestation and industrialization and consumption of resources and extinction and loss of biodiversity, which is going to come up this time too, but we were encouraged to reduce, reuse, recycle, and rethink. So anybody have any examples of times when they did rethink or recycle or reuse what they have or reduce their consumption?
I think I've been very water aware. Not having to rinse everything as thoroughly as I think I do, or stuff like just aware of the faucet being turned on and stuff like that.
Okay. Anyone else? John, what's the mileage on the white car?
Pardon me?
What's the mileage on our white car?
On your car?
Yeah.
261,000 plus.
We're reusing it
Back
instead
in
of getting a
warranty.
new car. Anyone else? I was tempted to buy a new pair of jeans because now we're getting high-waisted jeans, which would actually be more flattering to me. And then I rethought, instead of asking, do I want this? I'm asking, do I need this?
Mhm.
So that's a simple way. So anyhow, that's probably, we can, but be aware of all those, please. As I'd like this course not only to be sort of interesting conversation, but to have some implications for our lifestyle as we go along. So on this fifth day of creation, the creatures of the sea and of the sky swarm, and they're asked to be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas and let the birds multiply and so on and so forth. And it's clear that these creatures rely on water or air and vegetation. And when we examine our world, they actually rely on one another. You can see evolution as survival of the fittest, and it's all competition. But scientists more recently are seeing that what works for species to evolve and continue is cooperation. So it might be interesting to sort of change the way we see evolution from the old way of competition to the sort of a different lens where, for example, flocks of birds, if one calls out the alarm because the bird sees the silhouette of a hawk, it warns all the others. There's a risk in making the alarm because you might be heard, but you'll be heard by the other birds who will then take cover. Do you see what I mean by the cooperation is part of it, even though it may include some risk? And of course, there's a sense of the hawk and the sparrow are not necessarily cooperating with each other. But I mean, the hawk is dependent on the sparrow or whatever. It would be okay with me if the red-tailed hawks that I saw recently eliminated a squirrel. That would, I would say that would restore a little balance here. But there's this, yeah, is anyone going to add anything on that?
Well, last night, I had urged her, I had to do some lawn, and it really looked a lot improved after I did the lawn. So I encourage
I saw
listeners
that mom with those boys.
and look at that. And she then said, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I think it looks great. Just hoping we don't have a storm that destroys it. And Elizabeth, we ought to enjoy what we have and not worry about the other. And I thought, well, I was caught up on that one. I think that's true. We ought to enjoy what we have, and when we have it, a little more.
Right. Folks, there's a author I'd like to quote. Some of you may have read a Sand County Almanac, and the author says, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise.
Could you read that again, Elizabeth?
A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise. I think what he's trying to do in his book, among other things, is to look at value in ways that are other than what immediately shows up as profit. That there's a value in natural creatures themselves that is not tied to whether they're a product to be bought and sold. And I don't know, what do you hear in that when it says integrity, stability, beauty of a biological community?
So did anybody listen to Chris Garotta's sermon this morning?
Yeah.
The elephants?
Yes.
The story he told about the elephants and the farmers?
Well, tell the
Yeah.
story, because not
I mean,
everyone heard it.
Okay, I just interrupt if I don't get it correctly, but in Asia, there was a group of farmers who their crops were being eaten by the elephants, would come in and eat their crops, and they would have to stay up at night and shoo them away. They didn't want to harm the elephants, but because of the pandemic, they were not going into town to work, and so now they're at home, and there's a group of about 500 farmers, and they found this area of land that was, idle, and they planted grass to feed the elephants, and so this grass expanse became their feeding spot, and then it saved the crops. So it was a really beautiful story of this. Actually, is they weren't going to harm the elephants, but the elephants were eating their food, so they banded together and solved it a different way, and it kind of spread throughout the area. It was a great story.
So if we reframe things in a way that it's not competition, but cooperation and interdependence, would come up with different solutions. So instead of habitat destruction, I mean, there's going to be a certain amount of habitat destruction, isn't there? I mean, we're going to build houses. But what are some ways to preserve biological communities?
Well, there's a whole effort to rewild certain parts, like introducing wolves into Yellowstone and try to create a different ecological balance existed in the past.
Yeah, there's a real intentionality around national parks to preserve species and and it means that some people who want to go to the national park, if it's got a lot of people there already, we have to say, no, it's full.
Well, the beginning of Chris's story was about the fact that the elephants had to go eat the crops because we destroyed most of the places that they used to feed had been destroyed. So they had to go into this. That's why they were pursuing the crops. So it's a man-made problem that caused them to be going after the crops.
So the idea is if there's a man-made problem with destruction of habitat, there could be human intervention to restore.
Correct.
Okay. What are some of the things we've done? They've done some things small scale, and they're thinking of doing it some more. Highways have interfered with migration. So what are some of the things we've done as a solution?
There was a bridge that was built over some big freeway in California to enable the migration to come back to its former place.
Right, and they found animals were using it. And it wasn't just a bridge that was concrete or something. They put rocks and vegetation and made it look like a path, a friendly pathway. I don't know. They're thinking of doing that more in Florida so that not so many panthers are hit on the highways. And they're thinking of linking, instead of having discrete pieces of wild land, having corridors between them so that animals can move. What about migration of birds? What are some of the things that have shifted that people have become more aware?
Well, some have done what they could to reduce the light pollution, I think, because that does distract them in their migrations. And in fact, given when you look at the buildings that are left alight when there are no people in them, for whatever reasons that's done, it's clear that we could be saving a lot more energy that way, and that we should encourage those sorts of conservation activities.
Okay.
There's been some studies through the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, which is located in Crested Butte, where they actually have tagged hummingbirds. There's a lot of hummingbirds there. And they've watched their migration, and they actually fly all the way to Paraguay, and they come back to the same place. So they've been tracing migration patterns, which will help then people to preserve the pattern. So that's the other thing that's kind of cool.
Yeah, so you figure out where the birds are. Those are the places. I mean, for some reason, they know the path through the air. And I understand with the hummingbirds, they change biologically before they take off to return. Their bodies are shaped differently. They store up energy, so it's hibernation, only it's migration. So it's kind of amazing what the natural world does in order to continue to swarm, as it were. And we could be more cooperative. So one way, of course, is to notice the problem and decide to respond. But I also think it would help if we have the sense of delight in nature and not merely looking at a problem to be solved. I think that was what my husband, John Lang, mentioned earlier. And so there are biblical references to the delight, even in sea monsters. So for example, in what in our prayer book is called Psalm 104, starting in verse 25, it says, "O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you've made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Yonder is the great and wide sea with its living things too many to number, creatures both small and great. There move the ships, and there is that Leviathan, which you made for the sport of it." I just love that. When I heard that years ago, it was like, you made whales for the fun of it, for delight and amusement. And I'm thinking, whales? Hey, how about the dolphins? There's a sense here that God takes delight in the play of creatures. So when you think of the playfulness in creation, what are some of the things that come to mind?
I can't help but, since you just mentioned the great Leviathan, I can't help but remember seeing a whale breach. The explanation was they're doing it for fun.
Yeah, they're trying to explain why these whales are, leaping out of the water. And they have all these sort of rational reasons having to do with fish, so or something that the whales could eat. But that wasn't enough of an explanation. They find that they're doing it for the fun of it. What else? I remember a Disney movie long ago when I was a kid, and I watched otters sliding downhill for the fun of it. And they'd go running up and then they'd slide down again. Anywhere else have you seen animals play?
Maybe animals play and learn how to hunt while they're playing.
Yeah. Whether it's fox cubs or cats, kittens.
Just this week, walking down my street, I saw two young male cardinals kind of pecking at each other, flying straight up and then coming straight down. And they were clearly toying with one another, doing something. I had to stop because I've never seen them do quite that. And they were very small, so they were quite young. And clearly it was their playfulness.
Yeah, they weren't ready to mate yet, I guess. They were just playing. Anyone else?
Well, we had, not to bore you with stories, but we have a cat that broke its leg when it was very young, and we had to take care of it. Well, we were supposed to give it some exercise, and so we ended up throwing a spring of one of these plastic springs. Well, she still is retrieving these springs that are thrown. So what's interesting is you'll look at her and you'll ask her, and you say something like spring, and her eyes wide go open. So I mean, clearly she knows the game.
I had a cat that I made little balls out of used aluminum foil that I would throw to her, and she was with the idea that she would retrieve them or she'd bat them back. And then I realized that we would play back and, batting this thing back and forth. And I realized she trained me. I was the one who was retrieving them. This was the cat I taught to slide down a slide at a playground. And he would climb up the ladder and then slide down. And I could hear these children approaching one day, and I could hear these high voices saying, "Well, what is it? I think it's a monkey." And then they got close. "It's a cat," going up and down the slide. I thought, well, that is a little unusual. But he was playing. And we know dogs play. So there is a sense of play. And so we've heard that we are commanded to till and keep, to cultivate and care, and to serve and protect creation with the oughts and the responsibilities. But I suggested to you that God's sense of play and humor would be another way to look at the world, with a sense of delight and play as a way of engaging with nature that might motivate us to care for it. We just sit back and observe the playfulness. And I know the Bible is taken with great seriousness by a lot of people, but parts of Scripture are funny. We have to kind of teach people that, because at least I've found people are not looking for the jokes. There are a lot of jokes that would work a lot better if you knew Hebrew and realized they're making puns. But one of the funniest books is Jonah. I mean, it starts with God commanding Jonah to go east by land, tells him to get up and do that. So Jonah gets up, he goes down to the dock, he gets up on a boat, he goes down to the belly of the boat, and the boat is going west by sea. This is either going to be a tragedy or a comedy. And with the satire of Jonah, who takes himself really seriously, it's downright funny. I mean, as you know, it's very interesting. God commands the sea and the wind and a big fish and a bush, and they all do what God says. It's a little harder to get the human to do what God says. And when the tempest comes up because the wind does what God tells it to, and the boat is in danger of falling apart. The sailors figure out, they go find the captain, I think it is, finds Jonah in the belly of the ship, tells him to come up and pray. Everyone's supposed to pray to their God to save them. And Jonah gets up and starts preaching to them about his God is in charge of the wind and the sea. And I'm thinking, so Jonah, you thought you were going to get away from what God asked you to do by getting on a boat? Hello. And it's the heathens who get the message. And they also realize Jonah's the problem, and they're supposed to, but instead of immediately throwing him overboard to solve their problem, they're still rowing like mad trying to save the ship, and the ship starts complaining that she's going to fall apart. And so they finally give in and decide they have to throw Jonah overboard, but they're really reluctant to destroy him. I mean, the heathens look good in the story. Jonah looks like, he's not as obedient as they are. And then of course this big fish swallows him. And then there's a psalm like Thanksgiving that he is saved from the water by the fish, and the fish vomits him up on the shore. I mean, even the fish has had enough of Jonah. So, and because he didn't want to speak to the people of the wicked city of Nineveh, because what if they repented and were saved? He knew God was compassionate and he didn't want them saved. So he finally went, all right, I'll go give the message to the people of Nineveh. Well, the city's 3 days journey wide, and he only takes 1 day and starts preaching to them, and to his disappointment, they repent. And the king orders everyone to put on sackcloth and to fast, including the animals. I mean, to me, this is humorous. Can you imagine wrapping a camel in sackcloth? I mean, it's like, and they all repent. And Jonah's so mad, he goes out to watch, hoping that they'll still be destroyed. And he's sulking out there and he wishes he was dead. And this bush grows up and he's thankful for the bush because it shelters him. And then, the bush grows up because God told it to. And then God destroys the bush. And Jonah goes back to being angry. And God says, are you angry over a bush? And what is it? I got to get the quote. It's fabulous. Yeah, you're concerned about the bush which you didn't labor and for which you did not labor and which you didn't grow, and it came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who don't know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? I mean, the absurdity, the sense of proportion between God's compassion and Jonah's reluctance to have such compassion extended to the enemy. I mean, it's mocked. And this is a God who cares about the inhabitants of the city, even the little ones, and even the animals. But it's done with a sense of playfulness. So I think I don't know what to say. I mean, I think if we can look at the playfulness in creation too, there might be a level of gratitude and delight that would help fuel our desire to protect and serve. I don't know. What do you think? I don't think guilt is going to motivate people long term to preserve the environment. I think delight and appreciation. Maybe
Well,
better.
and respect for the environment, the animals, the grass, the trees, the sky. You know, I mean, God made all of these, and because of all of those, we thrive. You know, we grow crops, we breathe the air, and you have to respect those as well as appreciate and understand what, unfortunately, some of the things that humans do could be done a better way.
Anyone else?
There just has to be an intentionality to notice first.
Mm.
So I think you can get so trapped in walking and being busy, particularly in an urban area, you forget to notice nature. And sometimes when you get out of an urban center and you get to a smaller place where nature's right in front of you, you kind of get a wake-up call. And it takes a little bit of extra intention in an urban setting to notice nature. At least that's my perspective.
Mhm. That's true.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm thinking of a story, and I want to say it was last week. I read an article about this, but I think it's in DeSoto, but I might be wrong about the city, but somewhere south is where I placed it. But city council actually rejected one of the propositions to preserve all of the trees that developers could cut down when they're developing a new piece of property instead of preserving the environment. They rejected that and voted for the developers to go ahead and cut down whatever they wanted to. So there's this built-in conflict between conservation and what appears to be development, or positive development. So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of education, I think, that needs to take place because not everybody sees it the same way. And that's unfortunate.
So we have destruction of habitat, which means just going to reduce the biodiversity.
Yeah, well, which I mean, people do it and think it's all for the good of progress, but it's not progress for everything. There may be new building, but it's ruining the environment. And again, there just seems to be a political conflict that takes place in a lot of different areas. So again, I don't know what the answer is. I think education is part of it, but even laws that are there, compliance of those is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think, well, a lot of what drives the development to make it's easy if you just go in and mow everything down, and then you've got this big piece of area where you can build what you had in mind, whether it be houses or shopping mall or whatever. But that's really driven by greed because it takes more thought and perhaps might be more expensive to look at the property and go, how can we conserve most of the vegetation, the trees, but still accomplish what we want to build? Like I said, whatever it is. But that takes more time. That probably takes more money as well. And it's faster and easier. And then they plant these little trees that take 20 years to get to any kind of growth, just seems odd.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why the Amazon's disappearing at a
Mhm.
high rate, is they want land for grazing or growing soybeans or other money-making things.
Which in fact do support a growing population. And that I think is one of the problems that we have as across the globe, is that as populations grow, they need services and resources, and that puts them in competition with animals and vegetation. And it's a dilemma of great magnitude.
So with people being fruitful and multiplying, it means the other creatures cannot multiply.
Mm.
Anyone else? So what's your response?
I think little things make a difference, Elizabeth. And I think that what each of us can do on a day-to-day basis to try to help preserve our environment. And it's just the little things. When taking a walk and enjoying nature, and believe me, enjoy is important. Stop and pick up that piece of trash that you see and take it home and throw it away. You and I and all the people on this Zoom session, we're not going to be able to monumentally, oh, that's my dog, I apologize.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Just
We're
playing.
not going to be able to change what's happening today in China overnight. And there are big picture things that will take a lot of work and a lot of part of politicians and others, very conscientious and well-motivated people. But I think the little things that you and I and each of us can do from day to day is what we need to do to recognize the importance of our environment, preserving our environment, and enjoying our environment.
Well, if enough people did little things, that might help.
Oh, it's gonna. Yeah.
But what else? I mean, it seems to me population control of humans is, if we could do this instead of resorting to famine as a result of the destruction, I mean, the destruction of the environment. I mean, one of the effects of climate change is drought and flooding. I mean, it's like they've predicted that weather events would be more extreme, which has a huge impact on human population. Well, that's one way to reduce the population, but there's got to be I do not understand the reluctance to support family planning and choice and ability to reduce population, or to allow the population to be in an environment where you don't have to produce lots of babies, because that isn't going to be your guarantee of survival.
Elizabeth, who do we have today that educates the people of India, the people of North Africa, and others on reproductive methods, and is it only well, I don't know. What groups do we have? Is it only the UN that's doing it? Is it?
Well, there's an international branch of Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
There's probably more than that. And there are politicians who will not support it because of religious opposition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I don't like the fact that Planned Parenthood is taking tax dollars to pay for abortions. But
Didn't know they were.
oh yeah.
Thought they separated that out. I thought by law they had to separate it out.
I think they do. I agree.
Have they completely?
Yeah.
I think so.
Anyone else?
It just seems like everybody is scared to speak out. I guess during Earth Day, the young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, they had a documentary on her. I don't know if anybody saw it. And she just speaks truth to political leaders and doesn't really seem to get traction. But I think those of us that watch are like, yeah, go Greta, we get it. But it just seems like maybe, and I think about myself, try to be a leader in my environment, to be an example. I mean, I'm not really brave, but I was thinking, gosh, maybe it's more of a grassroots.
So what support would you need to speak out more?
Well, this group, we all did it together. Or we get a plan, I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I think we can do is get some people who will support us, so that being brave isn't, so you don't have to be that brave. Anyone else?
Melinda and Bill Gates are real leaders in this.
They are.
realm. Very effective leaders.
Yes. Yeah, they do some work to not just toss money around, but to do some how to use it wisely.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the health issues and the environmental issues are at the base of what they're doing. And because they feel like if people aren't healthy, and then they can't educate them, they can't do anything else.
Okay.
And that includes reproductive issues.
What else could we do?
I think education is key, and I think the challenge comes with people at different economic levels who all they can worry about is how they're going to put food on the table. And you try to talk to someone like that, and it's like, I've got bigger problems than creation, or climate change. And I get that. I mean, they do for themselves. So helping to educate people at all levels about the challenges and the changes that need to come. Excuse me. I just think it's huge. And that's where I kind of agree with Anne that, I mean, as a group, the grassroots level, but I think it's important because the more as a group that you talk about something and educate people, that's just another circle that can then go out and help educate people about things. whatever it is. It's like we should all form a care for creation ministry at church. And then next Earth Day, maybe our church will actually do something.
And also supporting those folks in the public space that advocate for these issues. That's another way in which, if we had a care for creation committee, that we would be alert to how to support those who are obviously having greater interest to force change. I'm going to church, so I'll say goodbye and wish you well. See you
next week. Yeah, and the media highlights the Christian right, which would rather have, well, reproductive rights doesn't seem to be high on that agenda. They'd rather have women home taking care of their families and having children, I guess. I don't understand why the other voices of Christianity that don't seem to make it into the press.
Yeah, it's because other voices aren't being loud enough.
Well,
or they're not controversial enough to make
oh,
news.
they're not colorful enough to make the news. Especially since I don't think just confrontation would work. I think, well, I'm back to we need to listen to each other, but oh well. I just, well, I guess it was, I mean, part of the problem was both sides got so extreme that you couldn't hear the people who were, I don't know what to say, more reasonable, I guess. Anyone else?
Yeah, it seems like it's just maybe a matter of priority. I mean, there seems to have been so many issues and so many social issues that the country's dealing with that environment seems to have priority-wise has taken a rung down or two than what it should be or maybe what it once was. And somehow we need to raise that level of consciousness back up.
I think there could be an extension of our St. Michael's Farmers Market to be about care for creation, simply because when you go to the farmers market and you see a farmer bring their chickens, for example, and all the children that come around to pay attention to the chickens that they probably would never see otherwise. And there's an education ministry for that could extend off the farmers market because of what joy it brings with all the vegetables and the animals. And could we then not only bring it to the church, but take the church community to the farms and have an exchange of knowledge and care and understanding from a very young age? Because
Carol, I'll
if you
nominate
grew
you
up,
to chair that.
what's that?
I nominate you to chair that.
Right.
I'll work with you, Carol. I really have a vision of a weekend care for creation, multi-generational event for St. Michael's, of how we do this. Just one weekend where we would have lots of various activities involving also the farmers market. It would be playful and yet address care for creation. So if y'all want to work with me on this next year, we might.
I think it's a great idea, and you could combine it with Barnyard Bash.
Oh yeah, we can combine it with all sorts of things and involve
the Barnyard Bash
aspects of the
well established.
So bring in. Oh well, anyhow, we'll have to plan it next week. I mean, I'll be happy to work with people to put this together, but we couldn't this year because of COVID. Guys, we're going to have to close. So I I have a prayer to offer, but officially we have to get off of here because it's 11. So I encourage each of you to offer your own prayers on behalf of the environment, the creatures that swarm, and on behalf of humans, that they could respond with delight and devotion to the gifts that God has given us in ways that help the whole created order to flourish. So I'll just ask you to make up your own prayers and think of your own actions. And I hope to see many of you next week. We're going to get to deal with the sixth day of creation.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Elizabeth.
you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.